Cool. Before I get started, I have like QR codes because I live in Europe and that's what we do in Europe is QR codes. It's all for like when I make a reference to something, or if there's like a video that I assume you've all seen but maybe not, or I want to make reference to another presentation I gave that goes into more depth on a subject that I'm talking about. You can use your iPhone camera to capture QR codes, but it's really more for like later you can go back and watch the video and kind of second screen it, that kind of thing. And I also have, they're all actual links in the slide deck, so after this I'll get on Slack and put the slides up and stuff, et cetera, et cetera. And now I'm going to wait 5 seconds because I hate it when the bus takes off before I get there. Okay, cool. So, hi, I'm Mike Lee, and I cannot see the future. But like, when you know someone and you kind of have this mental model of them, kind of an avatar that lives in your head, and you start to feel like you know how they think, and you know what they would say, and you know how they behave. And of course, you never really know someone, they can always surprise you, but the longer you're around, the more you feel like you do. Well, that's how I feel about Apple. I've been working on these platforms since before the first iOS devices crawled out of the sea. So I have the same kind of mental model of the company. Whether it's true or not, I feel like I understand them. For example, whereas most people see Apple as a very innovative company, I see Apple as a very conservative company. They don't move fast and break things. They don't need to be first to market. They don't care about fads. And it's not that they have a long roadmap, but they do take a long view. 10 years ago, somebody at Apple told me, in 5 years, nobody's going to care who was first on the App Store. And boy, did that turn out to be true. What I see with Apple is I see a company that is happy to let everybody else bring something to market and fail so that they can see what not to do. Like, I don't know if any of you remember the big tablet PC fad that happened in the mid-2000s where Microsoft was making this huge push to try to break Apple's dominance in the laptop market by encouraging all the hardware manufacturers to put out what were basically laptops with their screens mounted backwards. Kind of like this. It seemed like it was like a good solid year of the tech press saying, tablet PC is the future, Apple's missing the boat, and Steve Jobs would be like, yeah, I don't think so. And it kind of turns out he was right, because the whole thing kind of just came and went, and by the time iPad came out, everybody was like, Apple has invented the tablet, and Microsoft was like, no. It seems like other companies have this tendency to rush things out before the tech is ready, whereas Apple seems much more interested in taking their time and getting things right. Well, okay, to be fair, Apple has certainly been known to release things that are a little bit half-baked and, maybe spend a couple of years iterating over them, trying to get them right. But this is the trick, because when Apple wants to do something big, a real world changer that's going to require a lot of new technology, what they'll do is they'll break all the technology into their own product lines, which can then be released and iterated and improved so that when they're finally ready for the big thing, all the pieces are there, all the tech works. In other words, many, if not most, of Apple's smaller innovations are also stepping stones to their larger aspirations. So in theory, when Apple is planning something big, you'll start to see the pieces falling into place one by one over the years. And when you look back, you'll see how the dots are connected, and the weird moves that didn't make sense at the time will suddenly make sense. And there have been a lot of weird moves lately. Like, it feels like product-wise, Apple is in this awkward phase, which some people mistake as the company floundering, but which I take to mean that Apple is getting ready for something huge, a big transition, bigger than Mac, bigger than iPhone, a concept that I like to call eyeglasses. What are eyeglasses? Well, it's exactly what you think. It's iPhone for your face. I think this is where the tech is going, and most other technologists I talk to seem to agree. We all have different visions of what it would look like, but we all agree that it makes sense. We can provide a better experience with less material. And it also makes a lot of other things seem to make sense. So I thought this would be a fun thing to talk about. But I also think it's important to think about, because in a lot of ways, this future is going to change everything. And in a lot of ways, this future is already here. So that's why I call this one Foresight is 2020. So for me, this whole idea started a few years ago when I saw the list of iOS devices, and I realized it's just a mess. For example, I just went on there a couple of days ago and just kind of wrote down all the models that were available to buy. And it's just like, it's all these names and numbers and all this like legacy. And it reminds me of this story from back in the day when Steve had just come back to Apple and he was trying to turn the company around. He calls this big meeting and he has all of their product names on the whiteboard. And it's a similar mess. And so then he erases the whole thing. He draws 2 lines and he writes laptop, desktop, consumer, professional. And that was the roadmap for the new Apple. So I can totally imagine Apple looking at this lineup and thinking, how do we unify this? At the core, all of these different names and numbers represent different versions of the same thing. An interactive piece of glass, available in different sizes and specialized for different roles. These all share the same core operating system with an app store full of easy-to-use but powerful applications written in a common language and with a common set of developer tools. I think of this interactive glass as eyeglass, a kind of smart material that basically operates in 2 modes. The first mode is the opaque mode. It's the traditional mode of computers imitating other machines and interfaces, like a phone or a watch. I think we will continue to see this use for eyeglass, but I think it will become more common as an embedded control surface for other machines, like appliances and cars and that kind of a thing. Because, if you've ever been on like an airplane, once you have experienced that buttery smooth, responsive feel of eyeglass, you don't want anything else. And dedicated like hardware controls, they're not flexible, they're not updatable, they're not localizable. In other words, I think that the Internet of Things, or at least the parts that don't suck, will run on eyeglass. The other mode is what you might call transparent aluminum. It has a screen on one side and a camera on the other side, so you can use eyeglass not just as a magic window, but also just as a window. It's transparent, like glass, but it thinks like a computer. This is what the camera app is, and everything built on the camera, like ARKit. This is when it becomes pretty obvious that you could use this eyeglass to make eyeglasses. Now, I think eyeglasses will be the glasses we've been waiting for. Full coverage, not just a tiny screen hovering in the corner of your eye, but also not a giant headset that makes you look like a member of Daft Punk. In other words, I think eyeglasses will look as much as possible like just a regular pair of sunglasses. Probably available in a bunch of different styles and colors to suit your personal taste, just like the Apple Watch. In fact, I think that's why Apple decided to go into the luxury watch space, because it would give them the chance to develop the retail infrastructure and the business experience to compete in the luxury sunglass market. Because I don't know if you've ever heard of Luxottica, but I would not want to compete with them without maybe training on some weaker opponents first. Also inherent in this concept is the idea that eyeglasses will be based on ARKit. This is an important design distinction because it's one thing, it's a much easier thing to just put a heads-up display over the world. And it might work like that, but I think an ARKit-based solution is much, much more interesting. Because with augmented reality, the camera doesn't just see the world, it knows about the world. Especially with things like dot projection, you can generate detailed surface maps, you can detect objects, you can apply data detectors and facial recognition. And there's so much good that we can do. For example, with eyeglasses, there's no more phubbing. You know phubbing, this worldwide phenomenon of people walking into danger or bumping into things because they're staring at their phones? The best thing about iPhone was that we could hold it in our hands. But ironically now, the worst thing about iPhone is that we have to hold it in our hands. It makes augmented reality really awkward. And it also makes reality really awkward. With eyeglasses, the world inside the glass is no longer competing with the world around us, because with eyeglasses, these two worlds are merged into the same world. Now, instead of looking at iPhone instead of where you're going, both we and eyeglasses can look where we're going. Another side effect of object recognition is that everything can have an app, because the object that you detect can basically be a marker, a base for the AR, which is queued on top of that. It'll be like that Lego demo they showed at WWDC, but for everything. Now, I have to admit that the kid in me who actually owned the Lego sets in the demo was like squealing with glee. And as an app maker, I'm pretty excited about expanding the market. But as a human being, the whole thing it's kind of worrisome, because the world already has enough distractions, and I'm not really looking forward to feeling like I'm constantly hallucinating. But, apps are opt-in, right? So, okay, that should be okay. But still, I think as app makers, we need to be very aware of the problem of visual clutter. If putting the phone on your face is going to make the interface in your face, nobody's going to want that. Instead, we must make everything become clear. Now, when iOS first debuted, or I should say when iPhone first debuted, it was built on this design idea of skeuomorphism, of using these rich textures to transform the glass into other things. I used to describe the iPad as the book that can turn into a piano, almost a primitive form of nanotechnology. With iOS 7, Apple introduced a new design paradigm that discarded the transformative texture idea in favor of clean layouts that put the user's data first. With eyeglasses, that reaches its natural conclusion, where the goal becomes to put as little on the screen as possible. I think the notch in the iPhone X was to get us out of the habit of thinking of the screen as a rectangle that we control. Instead, we have to come to think of the screen as having an arbitrary size and shape. And what we have control of is staying out of the way, not becoming distracting. So while it is possible for apps to manifest as objects, just as it's possible to still make apps that use skeuomorphism, I think it's mostly going to be discouraged. The other thing is that when we think about augmented reality, we tend to imagine ourselves kind of manipulating objects in space, and we can do that, but only for like 5 minutes, because then our arms are going to get tired. Ergonomically, it's just hard to hold your arms out for very long. It's the same reason we don't have touchscreen laptops. I mean, I'm sure touchscreen laptops exist, but Apple doesn't make them. Because Apple seems to recognize that just because you can do something doesn't mean it's a good idea. So even though apps can become objects, for the most part, I don't think that's how we're going to interact with eyeglasses most of the time. Instead, we're mostly going to talk to Siri. When iPhone becomes eyeglasses, Siri becomes the main interface, which means that most apps will become extensions to Siri, almost like we're granting a new power to be summoned on behalf of the user. So that's my idea of eyeglasses: normal-looking sunglasses, fully immersive, full-time augmented reality plus Siri. Pretty simple, at least in concept. But other than everybody walking down the street, seeing things, and talking to themselves, what does this change? I think it changes everything. Some things are obvious. Apps are going to be really different. But some things are less obvious. Like, how might the advent of eyeglasses bring down the sewer system? Well, for one thing, I think that eyeglasses will completely change our relationship to the camera. I love the camera on the iPhone. In fact, usually when I buy a new iPhone, it's because I covet that new camera. But it seems like the better the camera gets, the harder it actually is to get to. So that nowadays, whenever I see something, and ooh, I want to take a picture of that, by the time I get my phone out and bring the menu up, and maybe it takes a couple of times and hit the camera button, and it's over. Like nowadays, I mostly just miss taking pictures of things. But with eyeglasses, the camera's on all the time, so you never miss another moment. Your baby says their first words, or if there's an accident, you can just stop time, rewind, and save. Now, I don't think we're going to spend a lot of time touching the glasses. I think this looks really stupid. But I think that for the camera, it totally makes sense because you want it immediately. You want to be able to stop time, rewind, save. Maybe slow-mo, super slow. I don't know. Instead of being a flat plane, the camera becomes this immersive space. Imagine live photos and videos on eyeglasses. It's going to be like you're really there. Imagine movies on eyeglasses. And actually, this is a really good example because there are like 3 different ways to play a movie on eyeglasses, which kind of demonstrates the way that content will transition. The first way is basically like the Lego demo, but with your TV, or where your TV used to be. Basically just recreating the old world. But then we realize, why limit ourselves? We can make the screen bigger. We can make it like we're sitting in a beautiful old movie theater. It's like old reality plus plus. But the really good stuff, as always, will take full advantage of the platform. Now, when I watch movies, I always imagine what they would be like on eyeglasses. Instead of looking through the screen at the other world, to be completely immersed in that world. I'm not watching from afar as the Avengers save the galaxy. That battle is happening all around me. I'm not watching some nature documentary. I'm there in the ocean. I'm flying above the glacier, or where the glacier used to be. Yes, when I'm walking around town, eyeglasses stay out of my way. But when I'm sitting on the sofa, eyeglasses transports me to another world. Like augmented reality, virtual reality has been with us for a long time, but has had trouble finding wide adoption. Even though it seems like there's been a lot of movement in VR lately, most of it is still pretty primitive. The fact is, VR content is just really hard to make. But with eyeglasses, augmented reality becomes the recording mode of virtual reality, which to me is just like, it just opens up so many possibilities. Like, first of all, what would be the ultimate virtual reality app? I think it would be the whole world, right? Like Second Life, but like the whole world. But of course, modeling the whole world would be insanely expensive, and it would be impossible to keep it updated. But with eyeglasses, we can record the whole world. We can combine all of our recordings and create this real-time, 3-dimensional, surface-mapped model of the world. Forget sending trucks out to capture things with spinning cameras. We don't need that. Apple Maps is just eyeglasses, recording mode plus genius. And now we can go anywhere, right from our living rooms. But that's just virtual reality. We can do the same thing with reality. Imagine operating a drone or a telepresence robot with eyeglasses. It would be like flying or like exploring a place, but more than that, I bet it would feel like transferring your consciousness into a robot and sending it out into the world. Okay, transferring your consciousness, that's pretty outlandish, but the brain is surprisingly plastic when it comes to how it connects the mind and the body. There's a couple of really weird experiments that show this. Like, there's this thing called the rubber hand illusion, where people can be made to think that a rubber hand is their hand. And it's not like a hard thing to do. There's like a ton of YouTube videos about this. And if YouTube is not what you consider scientifically rigorous, there's also a ton of scientific papers about this. And it's not just the hand. You can do it on the face or even the whole body. They do these experiments where they trick people's brains into believing that a doll's body is their body. Here's a BBC article that summarizes a whole bunch of these things. And I think this is really important, not just for this, but because when I talk to people about this, they have a hard time kind of wrapping their heads around how their brains are going to process all this information coming at them. And the fact is, I think that our brains are more adaptable than we believe. So no, I don't think it's outlandish to think that we're going to feel like we're putting our consciousness into a robotic host, or a human host for that matter. Because it's one thing to explore the city in a robotic body, But it's another thing to inhabit a human body by using a surrogate, which is just kind of a creepy way of saying one person streaming their eyeglasses to our eyeglasses. And I do think that people will have others riding along with them in their eyeglasses, seeing what they see, talking to them, even paying them to do stuff. And if that sounds outlandish, it's not. That's just Twitch plus eyeglasses. If you're not familiar with Twitch, or even if you are, there's a really good On the Media episode that talks exhaustively about this. Now, this is a lot. I don't think it's going to happen all at once. You know, the battery tech, it's not ready yet, and the additional demands of recording and streaming and sharing, it's going to take time to happen. But I do believe it will happen, and I do believe it's going to open up a whole can of worms. I mean, it's going to open up a case of cans of worms. For starters, let's talk about consent. Consent is so important. There is no freedom without consent. And the worst thing about the internet is that it was not created with consent in mind. This is already a problem, but eyeglasses is going to make this 1,000,000 times worse. This is an endless battle, but I believe that we on this platform have chosen to distinguish ourselves from our competitors by respecting the rights of humans. There are people who believe that it is not okay to put pictures of their kids online until they're old enough to consent. And we respect that right. Facebook does not ask your well-meaning parents-in-law if you have permission to post pictures of your kids. And that's why we're not Facebook. Again, not a new problem. And in fact, the law and the case law are well established and clear. If I took your picture and I wanted to publish it in a paper periodical, unless it was newsworthy, I would have to have your permission. I would need a contract signed by you called a model release before the publisher would even accept it. That is the law. But the internet ignores this law, because if you had to send Twitter or Facebook a legal document to post a picture, you would never post a picture. It would just be too much trouble. Not so with digital contracts. Now, when we capture someone's likeness, facial detection and location information can identify them and let them attach their digital consent. You know, it could work just like AirDrop. Agree to consent, adjust the terms, set limits, and then digitally sign with Secure Enclave, creating a machine-readable contract that is something a social network can easily interpret and trust. And because it's based on certificates, if you change your mind, you can revoke that permission. This would work seamlessly with the existing export and publishing architecture, including plugins, because we should only want to work with the networks that behave ethically and respect consent. Fundamental to ethical engineering is the realization that every tool is also a weapon. And we, as the creators of tools, have an obligation to do what we can to ameliorate this. And anyone who says otherwise is either trying to manipulate us into making weapons or has been manipulated in this way. And unfortunately, this manipulation is incredibly common. And this is not just about moral obligation. This is about good engineering. I often speak on this topic, and after one of these talks, somebody approached me because they thought that their tool was the exception, that it could not be used as a weapon. So I said, well, let's do some quick analysis. What are you trying to build? And they said, well, what I'm building is a search engine for patents, so that if you're building something and you want to make sure that you're not going to run into patent problems, or if you're that theoretical person who uses the patent system as an innovation store, then you can search for the patent information that you need. Very simple. How could that possibly be used as a weapon? And I said, well, I guess what I would do is I would spider the internet and I would take the contents of people's websites and then I would just send that to your patent search and then just sort of automate patent trolling. Oh, yeah. So what do you do to ameliorate that? You don't let people do things anonymously and you put rate limiting on there. And I mean, that's not just to prevent the weapon. I mean, that's just good engineering. Right? That's just going to prevent the system from going down. And that's why these kinds of analyses, that's why this kind of second thought is useful. So here's just a random prediction. I think that every new platform has its fart apps, which is to say every new platform has some distasteful apps that were not what the creators had in mind when developing that platform. I think that the fart app of eyeglasses is going to be an app that skins people. You know what I mean by this? Like, turn homeless people into Oscar the Grouch, right? Turn cops into pigs, turn strangers into zombies. Whether it's for fun or just because you don't like looking at the world and its problems, I'm sure that there will be an app for that. But I want to talk a little bit more about digital contracts, or more specifically the technology that underlies digital contracts, which is digital identity. You know, this is just the idea that once the device knows it's you, in this case using Face ID, it generates a random number, and then it uses that random number to cryptographically sign things for you. Standard stuff. It's what certificates are based on, it's what SSL is based on, it's what blockchain is based on. And it's obvious why that's important, but it's about to get a lot more important. Like, you might think if you're FaceTiming with someone that you're actually talking to them, but that's not true at all. Radiolab did a story a year ago about technology that allows you to make a video puppet out of somebody, basically converting your face and voice into their face and voice. Which is terrifying, yes, but what does it mean? It means that on the internet, I don't know it's you unless your device can vouch for you. Because I can imitate your face, and I can imitate your voice, but I cannot imitate a random number stored on your device. Therefore, your eyeglasses become your primary identification, and in a lot of ways, they become you. Let's talk about avatars. Siri, of course, is the avatar of the machine, although most of what we call Siri, not really Siri at all. Siri is just an affect, you know? It's just a way to give the computer a name and a personality, right? An avatar. But Siri can also be your avatar. As your personal digital assistant, Siri does things on your behalf, representing you. Now, right now, Siri only represents you to the machine, but soon Siri may also represent you to other humans. Earlier this year, Google demonstrated a technology inexplicably called duplex, which is like having Siri call people on your behalf to make appointments and stuff. It's like making your personal digital assistant more like a personal human assistant. I think we're going to see a lot more of this kind of thing. And moreover, I think that eventually the clerk who answers the phone is also going to be a digital avatar. You know, my avatar will talk to your avatar and work out the details before we even know what's going on. And it's not just the avatars, it's the machine that underlies the avatars, right? The genius, the AI, the deep learning algorithms. It's like, hey, we're building this super intelligent thing, and the more you talk to it, the more it learns how to solve problems for you. And we're like, wow, that's pretty cool. You know, I can ask this supernatural being to solve problems for me, and it gets better and more powerful the more problems it solves. That's pretty cool. If you don't think about it, then it's terrifying. Like, whether that thing is a deep learning algorithm or something like Alexa or an organization like Google or the government, it's scary. It's cool, but it's scary to contribute to something that's going to become more and more powerful and that will know everything about you because you've told it everything about you. It's like training your replacement. It's a positive and a negative. Like, training your replacement is necessary if you want your knowledge and skills to continue after you're gone. But on the other hand, if training your replacement hastens you and your friends to, shall we say, obsolescence, then it's a little scarier. I mean, after all, even if it has our memories, the singularity doesn't make us immortal. It just makes us the last ones to die. It's not that technology scares me. People scare me with the way they use technology. For example, let's say we're running a business on the web and we want to use AI. There's basically 3 ways we can do it. The most trivial is to just like put some bot on your site for people to interact with. Not because it's useful, but just because it's cool. I call this the anglerfish. You know the anglerfish? It's that fish that has like the light on a stalk on its head that attracts prey. It's like when you find yourself fascinated by this shiny object, only to discover that underneath it is this horrifying monster that wants to eat you. It might look like this, or it might look like this. I gotta be honest, when I saw the commercial, debuting the Amazon Echo, I laughed. I thought it was a parody. Like, I thought it was a joke where the punchline is 1984. But then I looked around and I was scared because I realized that everyone around me was fascinated. They were like, it's so shiny. It's so beautiful. It's so, ah! And what makes it so upsetting is that we're giving up so much for so little utility. It's like when Zuckerberg is supposed to have said, man, these idiots will just give you their information. So that's one way to use technology. What's another way? Well, if it's going to be scary, at least it should be useful. So we upgrade to some cool AI that's going to learn everything about the website and become our avatar, interacting with our customers, taking care of their needs, and basically doing our job for us while we make all the profits, which sounds pretty good, until you realize that we're giving up our relationship with our customers. And if we're not connecting with our customers, then what was the point of going into business in the first place? And if the answer is, well, to make money, stupid, well then what kind of world are we building to spend that money in? Like, I'm really afraid that we're building a world of vending machines and the coins that we were given for building and installing the vending machines. Because like right now the economy is people. People doing things that meet the needs of other people. People trading things, trading their time and attention for the output of that time and attention. We invest our time and attention into creating food, creating products, creating entertainment, creating stores of knowledge, whatever it is that we do with our time. And we exchange those things, and we exchange that time, thereby making everyone's lives a little richer. That's the basic economy, and it's a beautiful thing if you're human. If, on the other hand, we just replace that with a vending machine that we put coins into to receive the nutrients needed to sustain our daily lives, well, I mean, that's what we call a dystopia. If the coins that we get are a limited resource that we're given for giving up the old world in exchange for the new world, it doesn't really sound like a good deal. In fact, it sounds like colonization, right? Isn't that what colonization is, where you have a place with a group of people who sort of live in sync with the environment, and then you come in and say, yeah, we're going to take all this, replace it with something that you have to pay for, here's some coins to get you started. And that sucks. It's like we've run out of people to colonize, so now we're colonizing what used to be called the middle class. Taking everyone's jobs, replacing them with robots and machine learning and things like that, and passing out coins for the difference to get everybody started on this new addictive adventure called serfdom. At a certain point, what starts with a really nice system where we have trade and everyone's lives are enriched slowly turns into a system where the only way to survive is to have coins. So you have to have those coins. And the coins become the purpose of life, not the food, not what we do with our time. And that is when we become part of the machine. I feel like this is what the Matrix is about, right? Like, we have this job, we do some tasks, we don't really like the job, but it's part of the machine. We get our coins, and we spend the coins amusing ourselves and feeding ourselves and clothing ourselves to make us feel better about our life in the machine. We work for company A, we spend our money at companies B and C, because everything is just owned by a couple of companies, and everybody is basically just a hamster on a wheel, turning the levers on the giant machine. I think in a very real sense, the name of that machine is civilization. The name of that machine is our society. And the problem is that this machine was not built to be a thing that benefits everybody. This machine was built to only benefit a few people. And that's a real problem because the machine is not being run in a way that is sustainable, because they just are going to throw the machine away and everyone in it and just go do something else. And that's where we run into a problem, because those of us inside the machine have become disposable. We are no longer individual people with a relationship to the earth. We are residents of and subjects of the machine. So what do we do about that? How do we continue to bring the future without betraying our people to their colonizers? We have to be smarter. Which brings me to the third way, the better way. Now imagine this same business, but instead of using AI to talk to the customer, the AI is analyzing the business and talking to the proprietor so that the proprietor can make better decisions. Think about how Netflix used people's viewing habits to figure out exactly what people wanted to see. Instead of a terrifying dystopia, we got a golden age of television. The easy money is in replacing humans, but the smart money is in augmenting humans. Now let's bring this back to eyeglasses and this idea of reducing clutter. Here's an example of a kind of machine learning, right? Like imagine you have an app and the app is adaptive to your behavior as a human. So for example, if you're always making the same typo, it figures that out, right? Autocorrect, pretty good example of machine learning that is adaptive to the needs of people. Now when we're making our apps, what we tend to do is we take a test user and we have the test user try the app. And if the app fails to meet the expectations of the test user, then we change the app to meet the expectations of the test user. And so to the extent that the end user is like the test user, then they'll have a great experience. And to the extent that they are different, then they're sort of back to square one. What if we could have the app do that? You know, what if as you use the app, it adapts to how you're trying to use it, so that basically part of that design process is done on the fly instead of all of it being done as an act of creation. It would optimize the flow for the user. Imagine something where the less you use the feature, the smaller it gets until it finally goes away. Or maybe the app is like, why don't you use the feature? Do you not know it's there? Do you need a tutorial? Do you want us to take the feature out? Positive machine learning makes your technology smarter. Instead of trying to replace people, try to provide a better experience for your users. This is true in software and in technology in general. If we're trying to serve the experience of the people we're trying to serve, then we're going to end up with good results. But if we're putting growth, if we're putting profit, if we're putting anything ahead of experience, then we're going to end up with things that are bad for humans by definition. Are we making something good for humans, or are we not? Let's talk about telephones. When I was a kid, the phone was a place. There was one phone. It was chained to the wall, and we all had to share it. We would go to use the phone. And if we weren't near the phone when somebody called the phone, then whoever was near the phone would tell them that we're not here, and maybe take a message so that later we could try to call their phone and see if they were nearby, and so on and so forth. It sounds ridiculous now, but that's how it was. Then mobile phones came along, and the phone went from being a place to being a person. Everyone had their own phone with them all the time, no matter where they were, which sounds obvious now, but if you had told me that when I was a kid, I would not have believed you. Now the phone is a computer, or rather an application on the computer. You know, if the computer is the universal machine that imitates other machines, then iPhone is a computer that imitates a phone. I mean, the Mac can also imitate a phone, but it's kind of unwieldy, you know. iPhone is small enough that you can actually hold it up to your head, although most people don't. Because holding it up to your head is an affect of a previous age. So now the question is, why is the phone even a physical object? Like, why do we need some artifact in order to connect us to each other? Why can't we just connect to each other? One day, dialing the phone and creating a temporary connection to your friends might seem as ridiculous as everybody sharing a single phone that's chained to the wall. You mean you didn't have your friends with you in your head all the time? I always say that the best app has one button, and you press that button and it does exactly what you want. And then the question is, why the button? Or in this case, why the phone? And later, why the glasses? Eventually, why do we all have separate bodies? I mean, bodies die, you know? I mean, it might take a couple hundred years, and then we're just these consciousnesses that like live in the machine, and eventually the consciousnesses, you know, it's not that they merge, it's kind of like how your brain's not exactly merged, and it's like all the parts of your brain kind of chatter with each other, and when they disagree, it gives rise to this greater being, which is your overarching consciousness. It's like this conversation of humanity's different parts talking to each other becomes a kind of overarching consciousness. And to me, that is the ultimate singularity. The combination of all the consciousnesses of all the people that give rise to the great consciousness. But the problem, of course, as always, is Conway's law, which basically dictates that the creation reflects the creator. You know, we like to pretend that what we make comes from inside of us, so we can prioritize the creation above ourselves and above our relationships. But the fact is, creativity flows through us, and we don't have control over that. What we have control over is ourselves and our relationships. And that is how we create healthy or unhealthy, helpful or unhelpful, functional or dysfunctional software, products, and systems. Therefore, the best thing that we can do to build better technology is to make ourselves into better people. Not better than each other, better than the people we were before. This is why it is vital that we fight racism and sexism and classism and anything else that turns us against each other, in ourselves, in our friend groups, and in our culture. Because otherwise, everything we build will carry these poisons all the way to the singularity, which will cause it to destroy itself. Whether you think humanity is worthy or unworthy, you are wrong. It is up to us to be worthy. So what's that thing about the sewer system? Okay, here's my theory. What iPad did to publishing, eyeglasses will do to interior decorating. Because once you have the ability to edit your reality, you just don't need that much. And given the increasing demands and the shrinking space, eventually all we're going to be able to afford in the city is a small box with white walls. But that's all we're really going to need, because with eyeglasses, we are wherever we want to be. We can put posters on the walls, or the walls can just fall away and we can be floating through space, or we could be hanging out with our friends in our favorite place. We can subdivide apartments to double, triple, even quadruple the number of units. But the problem is that the sewer system is not built to handle that extra capacity, so it either has to be upgraded or it will collapse. This is not a theoretical problem. This is not something I made up. Cities are getting denser and more expensive, and subdividing units in this way, often illegally, it's already happening, and it's already causing sewer systems to collapse. And that's kind of the whole point of this presentation. Because when I talk to technologists, eyeglasses isn't news. It just seems inevitable. But everybody else is horrified. And that's when I have to break it to them that all of their objections, all the stuff I just talked about, except for the glasses themselves, it already exists. It's already happening. If you don't like it, then the time to do something is now, right now. And if living in a tiny apartment with eyeglasses and robots as your connection to the outside world doesn't sound great, well, guess what? It's going to be too hot to go outside anyway. Seriously, our ecosystem is like an airplane that's losing altitude because it's too heavy. And we figured this out a long time ago. And at any time, we could have shed some weight and fixed the problem. But one passenger managed to convince enough people that it wasn't happening, so instead of fixing the problem, we've just been arguing about it. Well, now we've broken through the clouds, and we can all see the ground getting closer. But somehow we've gone from denying it to believing that there's nothing we can do about it. Meanwhile, that one passenger, they have a plan, and they have a parachute, and they don't really care if we deny the problem or give up hope, as long as we don't do anything about it. Nose down, chin up. It's what I tell myself every day when I walk down the street. Because there are two ways to be useless. We can hold our noses in the air, disconnected from the world and its problems, or we can stare at the ground, our countenance downcast. It is only with our eyes open and looking forward that we can avoid danger, locate opportunities, and make progress. To lose hope is to surrender agency. And I have to be honest, 4 years ago, I lost hope. It happened right here, on stage, at this conference. I realized that I didn't want to be a part of this anymore. I didn't like the future we were building. I wanted to leave technology production and go do something else. And then I read the work of Octavia Butler, and it made me see we can't stop change. We can try to shape it, or we can give up and let somebody else do it. But those are the only two options. So I'm still here. And I'm going to keep coming back for as long as I can. Because I've dedicated my life to engineering. Because it is not my life, but engineering that matters. Other people can blame wealth and politics, but not us. Because money without engineers is just money. Other people can blame the system, but not us. We build and maintain the system. Other people can bemoan the future, but not us. We bring the future. Think of a cell. A cell is tiny. It's nothing but a little bag of chemicals. The DNA encodes for proteins, the proteins fold into enzymes, the enzymes accelerate chemical reactions, and the cell's shape and function is determined by the reactions they accelerate. Like cells, we humans combine to form something larger. But instead of chemical reactions, we have workflows. And instead of proteins, we have source code. And instead of enzymes, we have software. Our work accelerates other people's workflows, just like the enzymes of a cell accelerate chemical reactions. The shape and function of our society is determined by which workflows we accelerate. We are so small, but our impact is so great. I believe the most important thing is that we spend our remaining time wisely. When push comes to shove, the only real value is in real skills, real tools, and real capital. Whatever you want to learn, whatever you want to buy, whatever you want to do, right now it's easy. But if stores stop opening, if money loses value, if everything falls apart, it's not going to be easy anymore. But real skills, real tools, and real capital will always have value. As long as you are useful, then you too will have value. And as long as you have value, then you have a chance. To borrow a quote from Christopher Walken, this is as good as it's going to get, and it's never going to get this good again. So whatever you do, don't wait to follow your dreams. Thank you, and good luck.